This is INCRadio, DCEM 954, the voice of truth, the official radio station of the Church of Christ or Iglesia ni Cristo.
Don't underestimate
the power
of a single
conversation.
It could change your whole life.
INCRadio Chatline.
conversations that matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of INCRadio Chatland, where we have conversations that matter. I am Elsom John Wilkers, live here from Rockford, Illinois. It's so good to see all of you there today in our live chat. And we do hope that you join in on our conversation, because this is again with most of my all of my topics, all the topics that I write for Chatline. All of them are very close to my heart, or it's something that's kind of like in my mind. And this is another conversation just like that. So we're going to be talking about, constructive criticism, what makes constructive criticism, and, like when to use it. But before that, I do have my friends joining me here. So all of you there in the live chat and, to my friends here in the panel, I want to ask you first, what makes a constructive criticism? What makes it different from just being, like maybe a negative feedback? What makes it constructive?
I think when you give criticism, it's constructive when, one, you have good intentions and you're not saying it just to, just to be negative. But when you're giving that feedback or that criticism, it's because you want them to improve and not just, oh, your hair doesn't look good, because that's not constructive, right? But if you said, hey, your hair is kind of messy a little, maybe we could comb it or something, then you're giving criticism, but in a way that's going to help them. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, I definitely agree. Because it's important that when you do give constructive criticisms, it's definitely a feedback that would help not only enhance one's individual improvement, like what Arnie was saying, but also it's something that they can use to continuously amplify their life as well, in terms of whatever it is that they're receiving, whether, let's say, positive or constructive criticism at work, for example, or with friends, from some friends and family as well. So basically, it's something that's positive and that's very helpful to improve our lives, ourselves, and being able to, just have that positive also mental state of being. That way, it's one of those where we can continuously apply also in our lives, because nobody's perfect. That's the one thing, is even me, when I receive constructive criticism, I'm grateful because they're giving me something that I can use, that I can improve on, and, everything else.
And, to add to that, we do have a comment from one of our viewers. Renz did make a comment, and he said, it's a comment that helps and pushes you to be better, and it comes from a place of love. I totally agree with what he just said. Right?
That added at the end, love. Yeah. But it's not always pleasant, though, I would say. Constructive criticism. I think the misconception sometimes is that it doesn't come without pain for the receiver. Of course, I know we'll get into it, but I think it can still feel painful, because criticism sometimes you're just like, oh man. Yeah.
So one more, Melanie also said that constructive criticism is meant to help someone grow and improve. It is not meant to belittle or attack someone. and see that it's true. Because then that's how you know it's something where you want them to be better and you're not just saying it to be mean.
Yes, it's uplifting, not degrading.
Mhm.
And again, that love word, because they care for us, because they love us, and we love them and we care for them. So we also do, we're the receiving end and also the giver, right? It's give and take relationship. Yeah.
True.
Okay, but what do you think about what Nate said? Because Nate said to construct is to build up, but criticism is to take down. So it's kind of a controversy.
Well, that's the thing that I do want to get into, because like when I did look up, like because I wanted to see like what examples of constructive criticisms are, and I looked up sentences, and there's this thing that I noticed with all of them. There is that like what I said, like it can be painful, because one part of it is if you look at the word or the words that make up constructive criticism, one of the words is criticism, and criticism hurts. Feedback hurts. Or I guess like when you say criticism, it's kind of like it has sort of like maybe a negative connotation in terms of like feedback. Criticism,
Pointing out what you did wrong.
yeah,
When you get pointed out what you did wrong, that's always tough to swallow.
Yeah, it sounds harsh, right? Just even the word, like it has that connotation, So I think that's how we do see it. Criticism, criticism is to break something down, to take something down. But then there's that other part of that, which is constructive. And when it did think about it when you were mentioning it, that like if you're gonna say something that's like maybe gonna hurt someone, that criticism, there has to be that constructive part to it as well. Because if you just have the criticism, you don't have the constructive, then it's just a criticism. So then how do you guys tell the difference between the two? Like when Melvin?
I think even just the tone of how it's being said, if they are saying it in a tone that is pleasant, I think it comes across more positive, as opposed to in a way where they're mocking you or they're being sarcastic. Then that one to me comes off a little bit more negative.
Yeah, not only the tone, but the verbiage, the use of words, the wordings, how you say it, how you express yourself, the kind of words you use. I mean, it's easy to tell somebody, oh, you're this, but usually you're not. So yes, when EJ pointed out earlier in terms of, well, it's positive, but at the same time it's negative. Well, you got to have that positive and negative impact, because yes, it's negative in a way to where they're calling out what we're doing wrong, like what Tony said, but at the same time it also gives us that the things that we're doing wrong, but at the same time it's something that we either don't normally do, or maybe it's just something that we're doing wrong per se. It's not like, oh, I'm giving you this, I'm throwing this positive criticism at you to be negative towards you. No, it's not. But like what Arnie mentioned, the tone, and then you couple that with words, then yes, it makes a huge impact, because depending on who you're talking to or who is telling us what those positive criticisms are, it also depends on our end as a receiver, how we're going to receive it and take that, depending on the situation. Because okay, I'm going to give you an example. At work, I usually meet deadlines, and something happened. So I took in a personal matter. I'm bringing it at work. And so I got called out and say, okay, you're usually not like this, Melvi. What's going on? We want you to know that your work is good, and that we love having you around, and that we appreciate that you're going overboard sometimes and doing more than you can possibly handle. And so I had to open up and say, well, unfortunately, I haven't been really focused lately. And therefore it's affecting my performance. And so I got called out. Now my boss said, okay, completely understandable, But moving forward, let's do our best to not take our personal matter here at work and do your due diligence to focus on the matter at hand. And I get it. Sometimes personal matters can affect our lives wherever we're at. But again, it's all about being self aware. We have to be mindful. And above all, we really, really have to make that choice that when you're at work, you need to do your work. You can't be doodling. You can't be, sitting there and scribbling or thinking about other things. And sometimes I'm human. I'm a human being. I do get easily distracted, and therefore I had to learn the hard way. And I got called out on it. And I told them I'm sorry.
Yes. I do want to say this just for like the people who are like tuned in with us, like they're solving out. Like I do just want to say this. Like I said earlier, like criticism has a negative connotation, but at the end of the day, I think it's better to see criticism more as brutal honesty than it is a way to break down some or to take down, right? Like seeing it more as honesty, like like sometimes you really don't want to tell someone what they did wrong, but you just you have to you have to tell them. And I'm seeing some faces. So what do you guys
No, because like Nate had typed something in which I kind of agree with, but then Renz is against it. So Nate says, just be sure to say with all due respect first, right? Then it's all good. But then Renz said, when you hear with all due respect, it's equivalent to prepare for the battle. No, seriously, because sometimes I do hear people say with all due respect, but then what they have to say after really isn't that great. And so, is it really preparing you for the positive stuff, or is it preparing you for, like
No.
Ren says, a battle?
Arnie, I would say it's like think of it like this: you're gonna pass by someone, right? You're kind of gonna get in their way for a little bit. You're gonna pass by them. Like it's the equivalent of saying "excuse me" before you do. Like you warn them. You warn them. Like it's rude to just kind of like just walk walk in front of them without saying "excuse me." So maybe it's like that. Or, like with all due respect, it's kind of like saying, like I will say some things that it might hurt, it might hurt you. I'm gonna be honest with like my perspective, there. Yeah.
I think honesty is okay, but like if it's not coupled with something that they can do about it, that's different. Like, don't just tell them like you really sucked at, like that sucked earlier. Like that performance was not like that's brutal honesty, right? And if you can do that with like a friend, if you can do that, I'm sure me and EJ could do that with each other. Like, EJ, I'm sorry, that really sucked. But this is what, I think you need to work on. I think if you could do this, this, and this, I think that's where the constructive part comes in. Because if you don't give them something to like do, then they're kind of just like, oh, well, I guess that just sucked then. but like, how can I make it not suck? That's the whole constructive part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, there's the criticism. The criticism is like the brutal honesty. Like for you, like you might even feel and look uncomfortable saying the criticism part, but yeah, you do need to follow it up with a positive, or like not necessarily a positive, but what they can do or what you think they can do to improve on, because that's the constructive part of it. You give the criticism, you also got to give the constructive. You can't just give the criticism and not give the constructive, because how's that going to help them? Yeah, like what Tony said, if you just tell someone, oh yeah, your performance, it was bad, and then you don't say it's like now they're wondering, oh, how can I make it better? Like I don't know. Like what did they do wrong? They just said it's bad.
I'm looking at Renz's comment there in the live chat. He said, sometimes you want real talk and you're wanting to improve something, but people tend to say everything is fine about you. I think it's good. I think you're doing great. Nothing wrong with it. Why do you think that people don't give constructive criticism? Like, do you think people are just afraid of?
Yeah, I think people either they're afraid or some people don't like confrontation, where they don't want to disagree with anybody. They want to be liked by everyone, so they don't feel that. And I think also because they don't want to hurt the person that they're talking to. Like you said, if you know them well enough, you know, yeah, you could say what you did was just not that great, right? But if you don't know somebody, you're going to kind of like walk on eggshells because you don't want to step on anyone's toes. I think that's why people aren't brutally honest. Not like me, I'm brutally honest no matter what, whether I know you or not. So, and I think that's why people do it.
Yes, we know that, Arnie. You are very well aware. And thank you for the positive criticisms.
I was gonna say that, Mo. You beat me to it.
No, but I definitely agree with her though. When we mentioned friends, it's so much easier to just throw the brutal honesty when it comes to whatever comments we think about. And they are going to be honest with us, whether we're wrong with something or there's something wrong with us or we did something really, really bad. Nothing wrong with that because we care and love each other. We have that kind of relationship. Now, in a professional setting, though, that's when, when Arnie said you're walking like, you're in walking eggshells. Very, very true. I've seen a lot of either supervisors or in the management where they really, really have to be careful with the words they use because a lot of their subordinates are very easily offended. And the minute they say either a certain word, and some of these employees, they're just really stubborn and they just have that personality. It's their attribute. There's no changing it. We can't change anybody. And I've seen it to where when a manager actually said a positive constructive criticism towards one of our coworkers, she was very upset. She got offended. I don't remember what she said back, but she didn't take it well. But then it was an important matter that needed to be addressed. And so all of us just sat there and we didn't know how to react afterwards. But, like I said, everybody's different. Everybody has different personalities, and depending on who we're talking to or we're giving that criticism, that's why, again, it's very important that we have to be mindful of our verbal and nonverbal cues, because not everybody's willing to do that, especially the ones who think they know it all. That's another thing is some people, they think they know it all and they are always right and they don't want to receive any other comments. And when you try to share something or suggest something, they just poop on it. So I've had that experience too.
And just to add to what Melvi you just said, and that's true. Some people do not take criticism well. And I think that's why other people are not honest, because they see when you try to talk to them honestly, they take it negatively. And so they don't want to be on the other end of that. And I think that's why some people do not give, the feedback or the criticism, even though it's true, because whoever's getting it is not going to like it.
I will say though, there's such a nuance, I think, to, because EJ, you said earlier, you kind of blanketed it with brutal honesty. But to be fair, I think there's different lines of what we can say is fair to say to someone and then versus not fair to say. Like if I'm telling you, if I'm trying to critique you, yes, like just as a neutral critique, but I tell you, your performance was worse than a monkey riding like an elephant in the zoo. Like, I feel like there's such extreme like adages that you could do to it that sometimes they're just not necessary. That sometimes people are just to the point of you're insulting the person, where it's like, I don't think all of that is necessary. I think there's certain tiers to it. I feel like when you can kind of sense that, okay, this is getting a little overboard in terms of the criticism.
Yeah, I would say yeah. Like especially if you're kind of new to like new friends with like someone like saying this, and you want to help them, right? You want to help them improve. Like saying something like, "Oh, like like when you were saying earlier, I noticed your, I noticed you kind of, you were kind of eating your words in this part of the song. Like there's that, but." um, like like if you're with a friend and you know that they can take, well, not necessarily take it all, but like they would laugh at it if you make like a comment, like like you make like a comment like bro, your voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Like I know for me, like I have friends that would tell me that, and it would make me laugh just because of like how ridiculous the comparisons are. But yes, like there's tiers to it. Like it depends on how close you are to someone or how you know that they would react to something, right? Like, and that's, I think, when you were talking earlier about like being walking on eggshells when you're giving criticism to someone. It's harder to give criticism to someone who you don't know too well, because again, you don't know how they're gonna react, so you kind of go for like the safe options first. Like for some people, I think it is too much when you, or it's not, it doesn't help when you just tell them, I think you did great, or I think you did good, like keep up the good work. Like for just for me, that's not gonna help. Like I would, yeah, I would encourage to do, like, people to give criticism, because it helps to be honest. If something's, if you notice that something's not good, or if they can improve on it, like I would rather people be honest about it, but then also understand that part of, like, if you're gonna be honest about it, uh like, help them to help them to, on like what they can do, like give that constructive part, as well, but I do want to ask this to you guys. This came up like in sort of like a brainstorming session. Like, is there ever a time or a situation where you think, you know criticism, like even constructive criticism, isn't appropriate? Like, like you
Yes.
can give it, but you shouldn't.
Yes. I think when people are not an expert or they don't know things about the topic, then I don't think they have the right to criticize, because, like, whether it's in the workforce or anywhere else, when people are telling you you're not doing it correctly, well, how would they know? They don't know the job. They don't know what they're doing. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think, honestly, if you don't know what you're talking about, I don't think you have a right to criticize others. But that's just my opinion.
Credibility, right? I think that's the word there.
Yes.
Yeah, they're already questioning your credibility when they don't even they have no clue about your ability yet, that they haven't even seen you do, or they're already criticizing in their head with their first impression, for example, especially when you're the one presenting the material. I mean, they don't have to say anything. They basically show it through their physical actions or their, you know, nonverbal cues. See, it can it works either way, positive, or I mean, it becomes negative when they don't even have to say anything, but they're already looking down at you without even giving you an opportunity to showcase what you need to do, or when it comes to, doing what you need to do on your end.
I think it depends on the situation too. Wherever your environment is, like we've mentioned, like workplace versus with friends, versus like with family. There are certain situations where you might observe something and you want to give constructive criticism, like maybe like from family member to family member, but maybe that situation doesn't directly involve you, so you don't want to like overstep boundaries, right? So there's some things that maybe you just shouldn't comment on. Like maybe you could do it later on privately, not in a forum with a bunch of people to call people out. Like I've seen things like that where people will call people out in front of a bunch of people, and I'm like, that you can do that, but that is not conducive to being constructive, that will just, I feel like that just shuts people out so much more. Because when you put someone in a situation that will single them out or embarrass them or publicly like humiliate them, all the more they will not be open. Because I think that's an aspect to giving criticism or critiquing someone in general. In order for you to be successful in critiquing the other person, that other person has to be receptive to what you're saying. So if you're putting them in a situation that will make them feel like they're being targeted, that makes them feel like they're being, like attacked, basically, it's going to be really hard for them to hear what you have to say. So the situation, the timing of it, what is your relationship to whatever it is that's going on? Like, are you even in like the position to be giving, like what was said by Arnie earlier? Are you even in the position to critique them on that thing? It's a lot of different levels to kind of consider before even making that first step to, should I even be doing it in the first place? So,
and I agree with the timing because, there is a proper place and time to give your feedback. You do not want to do it in front of everybody because then they're going to feel embarrassed, as opposed to doing it in private. Because when you're doing it in private, then you're really showing you care about the person. But if you're doing it in public where everybody could see and everybody can hear, then you're making it more of a show than giving the feedback. So I agree with that.
Well, in the
like
first
a power play.
in the first place, you should know what your intent is. What is your intent? Is your intention really giving positive criticism, or is it just because you just want to say it for the sake of saying it? Sometimes I've experienced that too, where people just blurt out words and they don't even think about what they're saying, and they hurt other people, sadly.
And I think some people do that because, like, let's say they lack in something, but they don't want it to be so obvious that they lack in something that they have to say something negative to somebody else to make it look like they're lacking also. It's like they're putting somebody down to make themselves look better, kind of a thing. And that's how I've seen some people give criticism, not necessarily constructive, but they are criticizing people just to make them feel better about themselves because they know they're also lacking in certain things. That's how I've seen some.
I know that I have the honestly, I don't want to assume that in some life, like when that has happened to me before, where like I've gotten like called out like in front of other people, where I was like, you could have waited for us to finish and just maybe pull me to the side and tell me what I did wrong, as opposed to just standing up and saying it in front of like all these people who are now looking at me, and now they have this sort of like this comment in their mind, and they're like, oh, yeah, he did do that wrong, or he did say that wrong, like they have that, like that has happened to me. But I guess to me, instead of like maybe assuming that they have, just like at the time that it happened, like in my mind, I did assume that they had it out for me, that, oh, this person hates me, they hate me, that's why they did it. But looking back on it, I realized it was just ignorance at the time. Like they weren't aware of, like they weren't aware of like, oh, if I did this, he's gonna feel like, he's gonna feel like this, it's gonna single him out, like he's gonna feel bad about it, like maybe he didn't know it at the time. That's how I try to see it. I try to see it now.
Can I also add to that, and another end to that, sometimes also in high pressure situations, and I've like experienced this especially like in the workplace. Sometimes when you have like what Melvin mentioned earlier, certain deadlines, or their higher ups or their customers that you're trying to attend to, it can create a little bit more of a tense environment. So sometimes, as potentially like a supervisor or someone who's overseeing some kind of project, your emotions might get mixed in with what your intention is, right? What Melvi said earlier, like your intention might be to teach in that moment. Your intention might be to correct, but because of what's at stake, sometimes that kind of influences the way that people deliver, and that's a human thing, but that's also something that we should be careful of also, to not kind of mix the two. That's why it's always a good idea to kind of pause first before you give that criticism, and check yourself, so that you're not in a heated place of like, oh, this is really like, why did you do it, like blah blah blah, and you start going off on the person. Like in your mind, you might think in that moment it's the right thing to do, because, well, this I am overseeing this, I'm responsible for this, and I have to make sure that they're corrected. But again, you have to think, is that person going to receive this high intense screaming? I'm like almost screaming at you, basically. Are they going to receive that? Well, probably not. So it's always a good idea to kind of to check that. But then also, as the recipient, like what you just did there, EJ, kind of understanding them also, like, oh, well, they're probably like really like high pressure from what's going on. That's probably why it happened that way. And you could also bring it up to them in that way, like, I didn't really appreciate you bring the criticism back to them, constructive criticism back to them. I didn't really appreciate, like the way that I appreciated that you told me and you were trying to correct me, but I didn't like the way that you delivered it, if that makes sense. The delivery was not a great packaging. I
do want to ask that to you guys. Like, what if like, what if you agree with their criticism, but like, you feel like the delivery was like, it was overly harsh. They were like, oh, like when I was listening to you sing, it was like listening to, it was like listening to an elephant trying to climb a ladder. Like like it doesn't even make sense. Like that you agree with their criticism that like maybe you weren't good at or you did make a mistake when you were singing, but like the delivery, maybe the tone, they were yelling at you, or their verbiage, like the words that they used to describe your voice, like it was overly harsh. Like, what do you do in that situation? Like, like you agree, but too much. Arnie, Melly?
What else?
Not like I'm thinking. Well,
What
if
else
it's,
you quickly,
if it's for my friends, I am also blunt, and I would respond or rebuttal and say, could you be more any harsher than what you are now? I mean, I'm going to be honest too. I'm like, okay, noted, but gee Louise, I mean, do you really need to scream at me that way or say those kind of words? Could you choose maybe some other words that maybe could motivate me a little bit more? Something that would be helpful and not insulting.
communication.
Yeah,
I
but
had the
again,
same, yeah.
but at work though, you're right. It's really hard sometimes, because then I just give them the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes people are just really having a bad day. You don't know what they've gone through. Maybe 4 hours before you even had a meeting with your coworker or with your boss, that something bad happened, or something got in their way, and therefore when they're talking to you, they end up, again, the tone, the words they use, it either doesn't even make sense, or it's just really hurtful. And therefore you're sitting there taking it like, okay, I thought I was doing a great job, and all of a sudden you're doubting me, or you're questioning my ability now. What's going on here? We didn't have this conversation in the past. We never did. And I thought this would never happen. But then again, it really boils down to intent. And as a receiver, sometimes it is hard when, because it's hard to process the words they use, because we're not mind readers in the first place. So again, I'll just give them the benefit of the doubt, and then when things are a little bit better, then I would wait for the next day, or maybe even give them a week and follow up, because I just want to make sure that we don't have that tension. Misunderstanding that's going to arise, right? I just want to be able to go to work and be peaceful and just do my job and have a good day and not be stressed out.
And I think the situation, it all depends, because like Nate said, when he played rugby, they only communicated in angry yelling. See, so that doesn't mean that they were actually angry, they're yelling, but it depends on what it is and where, right? So I mean, if you ever go to my family parties, you would think people are yelling at each other. But the thing is, my family's just loud. I mean, like everybody's just loud, where, you have to yell sometimes to have that conversation with people, or you're not going to be heard. So
I do like what what you said about like about what you said about like intentions, and it something to like for you as a like maybe you're the giver of the constructive criticism, like I think for you like intent is something that you have to always keep in mind when you're giving that, because like you can say you can describe their what they did wrong in like in a way that's just gonna hurt them, but is that like really your intent? Is your intent to hurt them so that they'll do better, or is your intent to give them like pointers on what they could do better? Because I've I've seen this happen where like like the comment, the criticism, it was it was for me it was like I feel like it was overly harsh, and I've seen how it affected like the other person, the receiver of it. And when you like like I pulled aside the person who was the giver of like the overly harsh criticism, and I told him, like, do you have to say it like that? Like do you have to do that? And he was like, well, I was just trying to help them. How? So because they don't like we talked about earlier, they don't feel your intent anymore. They don't feel your intent to help them, because in their mind they're thinking, oh, like this is what this person said to me. Like they like I know I did I did something wrong, but I didn't think it was that bad. So I'm not gonna listen to him anymore. I'm gonna listen to them anymore, because I just know that everything they say it's just gonna be against me, because now you kind of built that in their mind that, oh, this person hates me, so they're whatever they tell me probably shouldn't listen to that, because then they're not my friend. They're not out to help me, they're just out to hurt me. Like they have that sort of thing in their mind now. So for me, like intent is very important, because when you're for me when you're mindful of like what your intent is when you're telling them, if your intent is to help, like it'll come across with how how you talk to them. When you're giving them that criticism, if your intent is to hurt them, you'll neglect the constructive part of that of that criticism, because your mind is just focusing on the criticism. Like if your intent is just to hurt them, then it's just gonna be that. But if your intent is like, what I'm gonna say is gonna hurt them, but I know it's gonna help them. So you're when you're talking to them, when you're giving them that comment, like your mind is going to like you messed up in this part of the song, but I do think that if you practice harder, then you're gonna be able to like master it. Like your mind's thinking of like both sides. You're thinking of that criticism, but you're also thinking of the constructive, and not just one or the other.
I don't think it's about intent, though, in the sense that not that we shouldn't be conscious of that, but sometimes I don't think people realize that their intent doesn't come across as they think they want it to. I think sometimes people are genuinely trying to help, but they don't realize that the way that they're going about it is wrong. It could be wrong for the person, it could be wrong for the situation, like what Arnie was saying earlier. It just depends. I mean, like, it just depends. Because, like, I know for my relationships with some of my friends, a recent thing that was brought to my attention that kind of like corrected me was my relationship with one of my friends. I'm comfortable telling her when I'm upset about something. And what she told me was, I wish you would say it in a way where you're pointing out more what I can do better. So instead of saying, "Oh, we never hang out," I wish you could say, "I wish we could hang out together more." Just that simple, like, switching. And again, me saying like, "Oh, we never hang out together," was, I don't have the intent to necessarily hurt her. My intent is to bring something to her attention, but not necessarily hurt. But for her, me saying that phrase was hurtful, but I didn't know that. So that was also on her to kind of bring it up to me and like, oh, okay, I get it. Like this makes sense to me now, because now I know how to love you better. Now I know how to treat you better in that sense. And that's greatly improved a lot of my relationships, like, moving forward from then. Because then I switched from the negative, pointing out something wrong, versus trying to ask, like, oh, like, could you do this, instead? Like, I would prefer if, like, we did it this way, like it's just a switch sometimes. So I don't know if it's good to be careful of intent, but sometimes intent doesn't always come across the way we think it does.
I do love how they're comfortable to tell you that. To tell you that, to communicate that to you. I do love how comfortable they are. But that really brought it to my attention that, yeah, like you can do your best with like trying to convey with your intent, but like, yeah, it's not always gonna come across like with, like what I was mentioning earlier, like their intent was to help, but because of the way they delivered it, it didn't come across as that, like the message wasn't, it wasn't delivered. So just kind of going by, like what we've been talking about. So for you personally, for you guys, and for you there in our live chat, like how can you turn, like let's say you receive a criticism, maybe regardless whether it was overly harsh or just enough, how can you turn those criticisms into an opportunity to improve?
I just accept it and do my best to evaluate myself, because when I'm given a criticism or a positive criticism, it's not just in the workforce or in my personal life, but everywhere else. And I've also learned to observe others. And this is so important when it comes to children, right? And again, it depends on the situation. However, and growing up, I realized this a lot. I learned a lot, not only from observing, but also, being taught and just from others as well who have taught me, and even from my mentors in the past, where if you keep screaming at someone and calling them out, especially when they're still kids, eventually, like what you did, EJ, they're going to shut down. They're no longer going to receive it well. And I've had that when I was younger. Somebody was always like, you never do this. You're always this. You're always that. I said, is that how we should be talking? Is that how you should be telling me what I need to do, when all I ever want is for you to care about what I'm doing wrong and tell me in a good way? And so after learning that from experience, I no longer do that to the people I care about, or to those, even the people that I know, especially when they're still kids. Instead, I turn that around and say, how about trying to do this? Because right now, what you're doing is not working. However, what if you try ABC? Or I'll say, I would appreciate it if you do not misbehave like this in front of people, and do your best to contain yourself, because it's not appropriate. We all need to learn to behave. I mean, especially when it comes to children's worship service, of course. Talking about my nephews and nieces, right? So, again, we have to evaluate not only the situation, but whether we're giving it or we're receiving it. We need to, again, be self-aware, and learn and grow while we're experiencing every moment of that criticism. Because it boils down to, how are you going to take it, and how are you going to say it? We all learn from our mistakes. We're human beings. We're prone to making mistakes. However, those mistakes cannot be habitual to where we're gonna either no longer be open-minded about the possibility that people will never change, or we need to change. So I'm speaking from my own experiences, because I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures as well, and living in different countries. It really opened my mind to a lot of like the situations and how people actually talk to other people. And I'm still also honing my skills when it comes to that. And if you haven't noticed, most of our topics deal with like communication when it comes to talking and being able to express ourselves and also understanding others and being patient with them. And that also is a good factor in motivating others and being helpful individuals so that others also can learn from us as well. So that's my take on that.
Taking, like I would I love that, like when you receive, like when you receive the criticism, instead of like being hurt by it, you took it as, she took it as another opportunity to be like, okay, like when someone said that to me in that way, when they use this tone, when they use this, this verbiage, like it hurt. So, like when I'm giving criticism to someone, this is what I can avoid doing. I can avoid saying it this way. I can avoid, like using this verbiage. And I wish she could have stayed a little bit longer. But yeah, you'll see her a little bit later on as well. But thank you to Melvi for like sharing that with us. But I actually have maybe a little bit of a different question for the two of you, here and there in live chat. Like, can you maybe recall a time? Doesn't have to be recent. Doesn't have to be recent. Where like someone gave you a constructive criticism that did help you. Recent or non-recent? That's okay.
I said mine earlier, so Arnie's turn.
What did you say?
I'm talking about my friend. Because the criticism was about the way that I tell her things. So
yeah, so for me, I think it was because I when you do give feedback or criticism, sometimes I would like you said, I would, if I'm upset, I would just say it at the moment when I know I shouldn't. And so it was pointed out to me, and they said, we understand you're passionate. That's what they use, the word is passionate, is when you get all riled up, right? They go, we know you're passionate about this topic, but when you're trying to give feedback to the students, try to be a little bit more understanding, a little bit more patient. And then so I had to think about that. And I said, okay. And so now I make it a point where if I have to give some type of criticism or feedback, I step away first, take a deep breath, relax. And then when I feel like I'm level-headed is when I'll give it. Because like I said, I want the message to be received, and I'm not doing it in a way just to be mean, and I'm not doing it in a way for them to get hurt. But I do want them to hear the message I'm trying to send. And like you said, if people are yelling at, screaming at you, they're probably going to tune you out, and they're not going to receive the message that you're trying to deliver. And so for me, normally when I'm teaching or anything like that, I'm very excited, I'm very animated and everything. But when I do feedback, I try to be very mellow, very calm, so that hopefully they'll receive the message I'm trying to send. So I think that was one thing I've learned because someone had pointed it out to me that I still carry to this day.
Yes. Like I was gonna get to that. Like, because I did want to ask you guys, like how the way that like you've received constructive criticism before, how it's changed the way that you give constructive criticism to others. The way, like taking from your experiences, how it's changed, the way that you yourself give that constructive criticism.
I don't know. For me, I don't like getting criticized. I really don't. Whether it's constructive or, as Nate would say, destructive, either way, it doesn't feel good. And I get it. Some people are doing it because they care about you and they want you to improve and they want you to, but for me, I feel like when I get this criticism, like I must be doing something so awful that they have to bring it up. That's how I feel. So I don't feel like I don't need criticism. I don't feel like I know better than everybody else, but I just feel like whenever I get criticism, even though it is constructive, I just feel like maybe I'm disappointing somebody or I'm not living up to their standards, things like that. That's kind of why I don't like it.
Yeah, we didn't get to touch on that earlier, but for sure, like that feeling of when you're told like you're doing something wrong, or you feel like you messed up on something, that is definitely very much the feeling, Arnie. Like you hit it on the head. It's like, oh, I feel like I'm failing someone. Oh, I feel like I'm disappointing someone. I feel like that's kind of why sometimes we get kind of defensive when we get criticism, because we don't we don't want, that's not our intent, right? Our intent isn't to go and do things wrong. It's not. But sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we don't hit the mark, whatever it could be. It could be for the workplace, it could be for projects, it could be for our relationships. um but what I will say in terms of not just giving criticism but also receiving it, the way that it's changed for me is that, with the different people that I've dealt with, it reminds you of how different we all are, in the sense of the way that people grow up, depending on the generation, depending on where they are in the world, what resources were available to them. People are coming from different walks of life and different experiences when you meet them. So when you come in with criticism, a lot of the time you really won't know how they're going to react. So on your part, whether you're the receiver or the giver of criticism, just being able to treat everyone with that understanding that they're coming from a life that you don't know anything about. And I think Melvie touched on it already earlier. And being open to adjusting, or being open to, I don't want to say catering. Catering feels like a bad connotation, but being open to adjusting to that situation, especially if it's a professional relationship. Like I felt like I've had to do that in the workplace quite a bit. Just the more that I get to know them, you realize like, oh, that's kind of why they're like this. Their personalities like this because of this thing that they've gone through. And people like you'll notice that the more you give people opportunity to be open to you and to open up, they will be more trusting of you, and it'll be easier also to give that criticism because you're allowing them to kind of be in a safe place. I think it's one thing to sugarcoat things and to tell people things that they want to hear, or being pleasant, but it's a very different game to not game. It's a very different environment to create something that feels safe for someone, but to still grow. And I think that's what you want for constructive criticism, that someone feels safe in your environment enough to listen to you and hear what you have to say, and know that you're coming from a place of love, as what was said earlier. Or if it's not just love, just care, because in your workplace you might not love everybody that you work with, but you want to see them succeed, right? You want something good for them. So that's how it's changed for me. Just the more that you deal with people, the more that you see that everybody's carrying something, everybody's got something to deal with, past things that they're still trying to overcome. So being aware of that, being courteous of that, being considerate of that, will help you a lot in dealing with people. And again, that's both ends, because there's responsibility in giving criticism, and there's also responsibility in receiving it as well. So
I really love like this conversation we've all been having, and you kind of answered like my last question actually that I wanted to ask, which was like how we can create those that safe environment, or that
sorry for preempting.
huh? What's that?
Sorry for preempting.
No. You're good. You're good. I love what you said about it. I love what you said about it, because I didn't want to. I didn't want to know like what your guys' thoughts are. Like how you can create that that safe environment where, like with the example you gave earlier, like that's safe enough environment that they do feel comfortable. Like both giving and receiving, like like that that criticism, right? That constructive criticism, where or at least communicating it if you've overstepped like a boundary, right? When you're giving your your criticism. And I think like for those in live chat, you learned or that you've learned or you've taken something away. That's what I wanted to say. You've taken something away from this conversation that I know we've had today about constructive criticism. And like when you're in a position to give or to receive, those kinds of criticism, you're able to kind of look back and consider the things we talked about today. And we will see you again in our next episode of INC Radio Chatline. And we do hope that this has been a conversation that mattered to you. We'll see you again next weekend, next Friday. You'll see all of us again. And we do hope that you have a great weekend. Bye, everyone. Bye.